I'm Deven Desai. I'm a associate professor over at Scheller. I work on law and ethics with my colleague Lucien Dhooge. Uh, we will just quickly. I'm also somewhat embedded with the ML at GovTech efforts as well as part of the Ethics Center. So that's since we don't have much time, I'm going to stop there. Lucien is a superstar in the law business
Ah,
community. He has been president of our association, if I remember correctly, and won, in fact, awards for writing up a case. So at first, when I raised my hand to this crew that set this up, I said, wow, I should get Lucien involved, and he's graciously agreed to do so. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be on earlier, but I did take a look at the chat, and I don't think we'll be too redundant, but I think it's great that people have been talking about notions of problem-based learning. I saw that there's been, at least in the chat, I think Ellen mentioned some of the history of case methods, and just now what people were talking about in terms of 300-person classrooms. A little bit of quick history. The case method actually comes out of law, which is what Lucien and I are trained in. It's then been adopted by other areas. Business schools sometimes act like they invented it. They didn't. For what it's worth, business consultants, McKinsey, think that it's all about business. It was started by a lawyer. I bring that up because it is sort of where we live. It is getting into a problem and looking at a case that sets up a whole bunch of other questions. And so what we're going to hopefully do in a very quick way is give you a bit of a deep dive, and I'm going to lightly interview actually Lucien, given his expertise, and then we'll try and tie it in to possible examples for the tech world. And so that's what we're going to up to. So Lucien, with that, what do you like? What are the strengths in your mind about the case method in bringing up complex problems to almost any field?
well, a couple of things, and I apologize. I don't know if you can see me or not, but you can hear me, I hope.
Yeah,
Can
don't
you hear
worry, you're all
me?
set. Yeah, you're sounding good.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I even cleaned my office for this. Oh, well. So I know. In any event, thank you, first of all, introduction, and also thank you for having me. This is really great. This group, IRES method, is something that was mentioned previous discussion.
Mm. Hey, Lucien, your sound is a little choppy for some reason. Do you have
Participation.
weaker
They're not
Wi-Fi?
passive. They have to. They have to be working on problems. It gets them to perhaps broaden their perspectives. So tapped in worldview cases and issues, and it
Lucien,
also I think
Lucien, can you
motivates
hear me?
for ethics.
Ooh, I don't think you
Yeah,
can.
yeah, I
Okay.
can hear you.
Hey, your audio unfortunately is really choppy all of a sudden. I don't know if there's a. It's good that you
Oh,
don't have your
what
video
happened there?
on,
Okay.
so because that'll not be a bandwidth issue then. I don't know. Is
Yeah,
there any way for you to play with that?
yeah. Let me see what I can do here.
While he does that, I can from the choppy
Yeah,
bits.
yeah, yeah.
I,
Sorry about that, folks.
I think I can tell you what Lucien was saying. It was um, what cases do is really set up a complex problem. One thing that Lucien and I talk about, and with due respect to this audience, is sometimes a little amusing. I'll say that. I don't know if Lucien would. Is the engineering demand, but it's not only engineers, MBAs too, for I want a real obvious yes or no. And really when we're dealing with ethics and anything, that's just not what's going to happen. But the cases make that richer. It sets up a history, a context, and a sense of in a live situation, as it were, even though it's not live, how do you sort that? Lucien, how's it going? You want to take a test on your audio?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm still chopping up here or
Just a little. Sometimes, believe it or not, if you talk just a little slower, it might catch up with your buffering. So
yeah,
with that,
yeah. That could
Lucien,
be.
what do you believe helps build a good case?
Um, First and foremost, I think it's got to be something that's engaging for students. And so one of the things that I've discovered when I write cases is I focus on recent events. Sure, history is important, but things that are stories that are cutting edge, recent events that students may have seen in the news, and then you can dissect those cases and come up with those news reports and come up with a wide variety of issues. The other thing I was going to say before I started chopping up here was that it also the case study method allows you to put these theories in action. I think one of the complaints about ethics education that I've encountered is, oh, it's just a bunch of philosophers, and how does this have any real world impact whatsoever? And the case study method, by taking recent events, find the theories in different ethical lens, allow you to bring those theories to life rather than just, as one presentation I saw many years ago, was 80 PowerPoint slides of every Greek and Roman philosopher you'd ever want to encounter. And that just was simply not effective in portraying how ethics is relevant to not only the business world, but also in other fields across campus as well.
Yeah, and on that, Lucien, when you're talking about active things to help folks, one thing Lucien's always said to me is, and a tip I think for this audience, is you also want to draw on your core knowledge. As an example, Lucien has a fantastic case study having to do with labor and sweatshops and how that works. So Lucien, that grew out of, as I recall, some of your research. And I was wondering if you could maybe give people a sense of how, when you know something about a particular area, that gives you a richer set of questions to then pose, I think, through a case. Is that correct in your view?
Yeah, it is, because, and it also means you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, if you find something that's within your wheelhouse, that's your area of expertise, and this labor case that you referred to, Deven, came out of Rana Plaza. Look at safety laws or lack thereof in Bangladesh and various accidents and occurrences there. But it grew out of other research I was doing. And I was doing this other substantive research, and I thought to myself, class, and I think this is that our translates very well into the classroom. We are based, and same thing with other work I've done with respect to religion and
right. Hey, Lucien, you're breaking up a little, so I'm going to translate. Lucien, you're breaking up again. So just to translate a little.
That one came to be. Yeah.
Sorry, just you got a little choppy.
Ahead,
so to help people with some of the dots, since I know this, for instance, I taught Lucien's case this past spring, and Lucien has done a lot of work looking at labor in general. And the Rana Plaza issue had to do with the way textiles are made. And right now, Bangladesh, it's a huge piece of the global textile market. But what's beautiful about the case, the way Lucien did it, is because of his research, he reminds people in the opening that sweatshop labor, and almost the same disturbingly set of facts even, where you have a poor group that desperately wants to work and is at the same time, in some ways, the money is better than anything they see, so it raises them up. But in the United States, we had a history where they locked them in. And there were textile manufacturing tends to have flammables, very simply. The cotton, et cetera, all the lint is really, it can ignite. And what I thought was really sad that it had to be this good in this way, but by laying out that history from the US, showing how it's now going on in Bangladesh, then tying it to really tough questions. The fact that in Bangladesh, there are people who say, these are great jobs, and if you don't keep textiles here, my daughter will end up a prostitute or we're homeless. Our colleague Steve Salvu has a riff on this where there was a quote where someone said, this job is hard, but it allows me to get a big enough mosquito net so I don't have to choose which kid is outside the net. So then we see with students a much richer question of, and I think it undercuts the sort of moral superiority problem, is what I would call it. Oh, it's not us, it's them. Right? Silicon Valley, where I spent 2 years at Google, is riddled with this. This sense of, oh, I know what it is. Oh, it's diversity. And I talked about diversity. I'm good. Cases, I think, thankfully don't allow that. They force people to sit in the hard cases. I'm sorry, no pun intended. The hard spaces maybe. Um, so what Lucien and I have done is you tee up some of those philosophies because they are lenses to help you understand what are you going to do. And I think from my focus on science and technology, you can even take the labor case, and what I do is I extend it and say, okay, well, what's the next step? And it turns out robotics, right? So, oh, what's the ethics of that? I developed something that's much safer, makes clothing, but of course, I've also now undercut a whole labor sector. Do you not develop the better robotic arm, the safer one? What do you do? Is it, as a technologist, is that even your issue? That's what you can set up right away with that. Lucien, does that fit some of how you would think through the labor case in your experience?
It does, and a couple of things that I draw from your points are, one is there's a fine line between giving students adequate history and overwhelming them. The Rana Plaza case, for example, you could talk a little bit about. We start by talking about the triangle shirtwaist. Fact 11 in the forward to Rana Plaza. You don't want to overwhelm them with history as well, because then the ethical issues kind of get lost in all of the history. The other thing that Deven said, and I think it's an important point in the business school, is we teach this course. Deven and I both taught this subject matter in our executive MBA program. And so these are people that have been out in the workplace 10, 15, 20 years. And one is we need to make sure that they find ethics relevant, because some of them have had experience with the topic, others have not. The other thing is to get them to focus on something other than profit maximization or ticking the box. And Deven mentioned that. Oh, we have an ethics program. Check. I'm ethical. So these are, I think this is just that we have, is trying to get students to think outside of profits, because for all, and also to view ethics and ethical issues as much box, or having a program, or having some presentation by someone who comes into the company.
Yeah, that's a huge point. And I think it matters more and more for so many people in technology, because, right, they either want to start their own company or join a company where, I will be honest, I cannot watch the show Silicon Valley. I find it more of a sad nightmare, not a comedy, because that opening season, if people watch it, where they just said making the world a better place, really that is what it felt like, but it was empty in Silicon Valley at times. And it was sort of, well, what do you mean by that? Oh, well, I'm innovating. What does that mean? I'll make some new money because I disrupted. And that's where Lucien and I go, okay, that's one metric maybe, but how about other stuff? And I think what we're seeing in technology today, just to give some more tech examples, when Lucien and I were prepping, the ones that I think would be interesting, I think, Judy, I don't know if you're still on the call, but for instance, Judy Hoffman's work on vision, I think that's a fantastic area to be much more nuanced about the issues that go on with vision. For instance, as I understand it, in the early days, right, it was a 5-year-old can do what a computer cannot in terms of distinguishing between, two cats. And I started to think about that, and I flashed back to one of my best friend from college is actually a ML vision guy, and I remember when he was getting his PhD, I sat there going, wait, you're trying to figure out what is the sort of thingness of a stool? That's Greek philosophy. Like, this is a very old question at one level. But you could start to talk about, as Lucien said, the right amount of history on, would you really say you don't want to have vision software that can do that? Or is it the problem of how good it is? Or is it the problem of how it was used in the field as opposed to when it's being developed in a lab? That would be a quick example. CRISPR continues to offer interesting questions. Think about, I don't know if anyone saw, but Florida, they are trying a gene drive. And I wrote about the ethics of CRISPR a few years ago, and I thought, well, someone's going to do this, and it's a fantastic question, right? What are you doing when you start to alter the actual ability of a species to reproduce, right? Science isn't going to give you an answer on this. But what Lucien and I try and do is say, well, what's the history there? What are you going after? What about the health issues around Zika, West Nile, malaria, of course, right? And the history of trying to contain that with science. There's a very rich thing that could be done there. In fact, we're thinking about trying to write that one. Or as another example for you folks, my impression is the development of the COVID vaccines was done relatively well in terms of the sad history of pharma and having a good system. And by that, I mean, as far as I know, they had a very good large N and a diverse N, both in terms of age, gender, race, just about any major variable you want, which was vital. But the history of this, as some of you may know, was head scratching almost. But another one of our colleagues who actually is now at Utah pointed out to me, well, the reason that there were certain medications that tended to be surprisingly well suited for white guys was not explicit, but it was, well, you had professors at universities and they used their students who heard about it, and their students tend to be white guys, and no one thought about expanding their N. Absurd in hindsight. But pharma got this one right, I think, because people appropriately banged on pharma saying, what do you mean this drug for heart disease, I think was one of them, works for guys and not women? That's bizarre. And this time they realized up front, you can do that. Other examples for you all, sometimes it's cautionary. Right before I got to Google, they had a couple really big, nasty problems with Street View and other privacy things because the technologists didn't know how to talk to the lawyers about what their technology was doing. So that's a lot, and we have a few minutes left. So, Lucien, do you have anything further you wanted to chip in, or should we see if apparently no one has questions? They're either exhausted or we're just, we covered everything.
Well, and I finally got my right at the end here, but nevertheless, I would just one thing about going back to writing case studies, and I urge everyone to and work on developing their own case studies. I'm happy to share whatever I have, but it's a wonderful experience writing these things. Always a work in progress. It never is perfect. It's always a work in progress because it's always got to be updated, or you think about something else, or you test it out in the classroom. Some of my others don't. And it depends on a large, well, they're very bright people, but they don't have the experience we'll have. So there's a little bit to get them to case study discussions. But I would urge everyone to do this because to me, it has been, it's, I hate to say this, I'm at Georgia Tech, but I actually like writing the case studies sometimes more than research because I can see the immediate impact with students rather than just writing a research piece and putting one cites it. So, so I just urge experiment and what you come up with, and studies across campus from other areas, because that would be great to be able to incorporate in my class and might inspire some other discussions and some other. Thank you.
Yeah. So I echo Lucien. We know that was fast. We're definitely willing to talk to people in more depth if they want and share what some of these look like. As I said, it's kind of the fun thing for me was as we were kicking this around, we might write one ourselves because there's some interesting things, and we'll see if we can go deep enough to make a rich enough case. Just as a quick note to folks, if you're thinking, my God, how big are these things? If I remember correctly, it's not that bad. It's about maybe was it 5 to 7 pages, I think. Does that sound right, Lucien?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, no offense to the tech folks. Yes, your students will have to read something other than formulas, but they can do it, right, Justin?
So, Go ahead, Justin.
Websites for cases. In the tech space, I don't know of that many. Um, UT Austin has a nice generalized resource. They're sort of small cases, but I think they do a good job. It's at the business school on ethics and business, right, Lucian?
Right, and that's through a professor there, Robert Prentice, who's a very well-known behavior ethicist, which is a whole nother different field, and is with to case studies from UT Austin.